Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to do something a bit different. We're completely reframing how we look at the origins of the American story. You know, when we think about US history, we almost always start the clock at European contact. Maybe the Pilgrims, right? Or 1776. But long before the idea of the United States was even a glimmer of a dream, there were hundreds of vibrant, incredibly complex nations already thriving right here. So today we're going to take a close look at these indigenous realities, the dreams, the absolute devastation, and the incredible ongoing resilience of the first Americans.
So it really begs the question, when did the American story actually begin? Our traditional Eurocentric narrative tends to just leave out the people who were already here, kind of treating their histories as just a prologue, a footnote. But as we're going to see today, their realities are quite literally woven into the very fabric of the nation. To truly get America, we have to push our timeline back thousands of years and explore the massive civilizations that first called this landscape home.
Okay, let's dive right into part one. Dreams before America, the civilizations that were.
Let's rewind thousands of years, way before any European ships showed up on the horizon. For the longest time, there's been this enduring myth painting pre-contact North America as this sparse, empty land of nomadic hunter-gatherers just following wild game around. But the reality? It's vastly different. Historical evidence from places like Chaco Canyon, Poverty Point, and Cahokia reveal these highly ordered societies. We're talking extensive social planning, long-range commercial trade networks, and really complex governance. Take Cahokia, for example, located near modern-day St. Louis. It was actually one of the largest cities in the world 1,000 years ago, literally rivaling ancient metropolitans all over the globe.
A perfect example of this incredible structure is the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Haudenosaunee. This was a sophisticated union of 6 nations operating under a constitution. They had a clear separation of powers and deeply rooted democratic principles. And here's something absolutely fascinating. Benjamin Franklin actually studied their systems of governance while he was negotiating treaties. Historians argue that this indigenous federalist structure wielded a very real, very significant influence on the framers of the U.S. Constitution itself.
Which brings us to part 2. The Great Unmaking, a world turned upside down.
So when Europeans arrived in 1492, the historian Ned Blackhawk doesn't just call it a discovery or a conquest, he calls it the catastrophic unmaking of U.S. history. It was a moment that quite literally turned an entire world upside down. Let's just sit with this number for a second. 238,000. Before European contact, there were an estimated 5 million plus indigenous people living in North America. But by the close of the Indian Wars in the late 19th century, fewer than 238,000 remained. This absolutely catastrophic decline was driven by a devastating combination of introduced diseases, relentless warfare, and forced displacement by European colonizers and later the expanding United States. Moving into part 3, erasure and assimilation, the bureaucracy of cultural suppression. As the U.S. rapidly expanded westward through the 1800s under the banner of Manifest Destiny, the federal government's strategy started to shift. It moved from physical warfare and displacement to a highly coordinated, systematic, bureaucratic attempt to erase indigenous identity entirely. And it happened so fast. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signs the Indian Removal Act. By 1838, this leads directly to the Trail of Tears, where 16,000 Cherokee are forcibly evicted at gunpoint and thousands died along the way. By 1850, over 100,000 American Indians from nations like the Creek, Choctaw, and Seminole were removed to Indian Territory. Then, as physical removal transitioned into cultural suppression, you get the Carlisle Indian Industrial School opening in 1879. And that was followed closely by the Dawes Act of 1887, which deliberately broke up millions of acres of tribal landholdings. The boarding school era was really the ultimate mechanism for this erasure. Institutions like the Carlisle School were founded by Lieutenant Richard Henry Pratt with a chilling, explicitly stated goal. He wanted to kill the Indian to save the man. Over a century and a half, tens of thousands of Native children were forcibly pulled from their families. They were put into these government and state-authorized boarding schools, beaten for speaking their own languages, and systematically stripped of their cultures and identities.
Okay, part 4. The fight for sovereignty. Resilience, activism, and the American Indian movement.
Despite centuries of relentless suppression and violence, indigenous resilience never faded. From fierce early leaders like Tecumseh, Crazy Horse, and Geronimo, who fought tooth and nail to protect their way of life, all the way to a massive organized resurgence in the modern era. In the 60s and 70s, the American Indian Movement, or AIM, bursts onto the scene. In 1973, roughly 300 activists initiated a 71-day armed occupation of Wounded Knee, South Dakota. They were protesting government mistreatment and demanding their treaty rights. They even flew an upside-down American flag as a distress signal. And this highly publicized standoff, it became a major turning point, paving the way for a totally new era of tribal self-determination and modern government-to-government relationships.
Fast forward to today, and that fight has resulted in 575 tribes with inherent sovereignty recognized by the United States government. That number is a profound testament to their unyielding fight to survive, to govern themselves, and to absolutely refuse to let their dreams be extinguished. Which makes this quote from N. Bruce Duthu. He's the chair of Native American and Indigenous Studies at Dartmouth College. It makes it incredibly fascinating. He points out that despite all the historical flaws and tragedies we've talked about, modern tribes in the U.S. have successfully built unprecedented sovereign power over the last half-century. Compared to many other nations globally, the legal framework for government-to-government relationships that indigenous groups in the U.S. have fought for and achieved is actually seen as a highly effective model of self-determination.
Now for our final section, Part 5, Redefining the American Story, Contemporary Realities and Future Visions.
Because historical sovereignty is really only part of the picture, right? Indigenous realities are actively shaping the present and the future of the American landscape right now. On one hand, you have these incredible victories. The land-back movement is really gaining momentum, with groups like the Snoqualmie tribe successfully reclaiming stolen land. Tribes are also leading the charge in environmental stewardship, stepping in to co-manage vast, sacred areas like Bears Ears National Monument. But this is balanced against some very urgent, ongoing crises, particularly the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, which advocates directly link to racism and chronically underfunded tribal law enforcement. To really understand the severity of that ongoing crisis, just consider this. Indigenous women in the United States face a murder rate up to 10 times higher than the national average. Let that sink in. It's a staggering reality. Homicide is literally one of the leading causes of death for Native women between the ages of 10 and 34. This isn't just history. This is a current, active crisis demanding immediate national attention and structural change.
As we gear up for the 250th anniversary of the United States, we're seeing this history navigated with a really complex mix of pride, pain, and patriotism. The sources we've been looking at provide this beautiful, historical symbol of that complexity. Lakota women, who were renowned for their masterful beadwork, would frequently weave American flags into their patterns. And it wasn't just simple patriotism, it was a strategic, quiet resistance. It provided an avenue for conserving their own values, even as U.S. policies were unraveling their communities all around them.
So let's anchor our conclusion with these words from historian Ned Blackhawk. He argues that the most enduring feature of U.S. history is actually the presence of Native Americans. He says indigenous history is essential to understanding the evolution of modern America. And he's right. Leaving these communities out of our historical narratives isn't just a disservice to them, it's a disservice to our entire national consciousness. We simply cannot understand the varied meanings of America without yielding to a truer, much more complete account of its first peoples.
Which leaves us with this final vital question to reflect on. How should Indigenous history be taught in American schools? Based on the realities we've just uncovered today, how do we educate future generations so they understand the complete picture, the dreams before America, the unmaking, and the powerful resurgence that continues to this day? Think about that as you process everything we've learned. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I can't wait to explore more fascinating realities with you next time.